Okay, in this video we're going to explain how you can teach your dog to respect an invisible boundary. And a great way to do this, or a great place to do this, is to prevent the dog from going in and out of the kitchen when you're preparing food, like we talked about in a different video. In this video we'll actually show you how to enforce the boundary. Now, a couple things before we go through this is how dogs communicate. Front-facing is confrontational, authoritative to a dog. Sideways is approachable or more friendly. And behind us we're defenseless. So, and just a quick rule of thumb, if you're ever approaching another dog and you're not sure how that dog's going to interact with your dog, the best way to approach is kind of a rounded approach. If you walk straight up, that dog might consider it to be confrontational. Now we're going to use this, and this is how dogs communicate with each other. We're going to use this to be confrontational with our dog to communicate that we want them to establish a visible line. Now, front-facing, like I said, is confrontational, sideways is approachable, but dogs are very perceptive. So there's a difference between this and front-facing like this. I'm a couple degrees off. So make sure your hips and shoulders are squared off directly at the dog. One of the things I tell my clients, imagine you have a string from your belly button that goes straight to your dog's collar. Wherever the dog goes, it pivots your hips and keeps your hips going towards them. Okay, so I'm going to use my dog Callie for this, and we're going to be walking back and forth, and it's going to be probably some interesting camera work because I have a really narrow kitchen, but this is where we're at. Callie. So if I want to come in and I want to enforce the boundary, and I enforce the boundary to here, and then I go like this, Callie probably just going to walk in behind me because my authority now is pointing in this direction. So the first thing we want to do is we want to teach the dog to leave the room on its own. And the way that we do this is independent of actually cooking anything. We're going to assign a command word of out, which we talked about in a different video, but this is a good little brush up. So the very first thing I want to do, I don't want to tell the dog out unless I know the dog actually knows the command first, so that we can ask her to do it voluntarily. So in order to do this, what I do is I have a high value treat, and I just toss it right outside the room, and I say the word out when she licks it up. And then I would let her come back and do it a second time and throw another treat, and when she licks it up, I'd say out when she licks it up. And she's right underneath it. Callie's usually pretty good about these, but these are pretty dry treats. All right, there we go. Out. So I do that, and I would do that usually about 10 treats, 3 or 4 times a day, different times of the day, and just throw them out, or throw them out. And after a while you say out, the dog runs out, and then you give the treat after they go out. All right, so let's say I'm actually going to cook some food here in my kitchen. So when I leave the room, or I'm about to enter the kitchen, so I enter like this with my back facing it. Now Callie's going to be here with me. If I want Callie to leave, I'm going to march towards her to do what I call reverse herding and take space and make her back away. So I square myself up to her and I just walk directly at her, and I do not let her go past me like that. And your dog will try to go past you, so make sure you step to the side. Now in my kitchen I have a very narrow door frame here, which makes it easy for me to enforce. You might not have that at home. A lot of people have a very open floor plan. So if you have a really wide space like this, you might actually have to put a couple of kitchen chairs, dining room chairs. Some people will get a piece of wood or cardboard or something like that and slide it over. Let's say it's a 10-foot space. Maybe you slide the wood over and it's on its side, kind of like something like this. And you slide this over to make it more narrow and create a choke point. Then after you've practiced for a while, the next time you move it over a little bit more, and then a little bit more, until eventually when you're doing it, it's no longer there, but the dog still sees and respects the boundary. Okay, so once I've marched to the boundary door, and this is right here. Now, if you have an open doorway, you might actually put down painter's tape or something like that so you exactly know where it is. I don't have one person forcing on this side of the boundary and one person on this side of the door frame, so just put that painter's tape so you know exactly where it is. Okay, so I'm just laughing because there's a woman behind the camera looking out the window in my front of my house, and her dog is pooping in my yard and she's not cleaning it up, and I'm going to let her do that because we're filming this video, but a little humorous stuff. Okay, so now that I'm here at the boundary, how I communicate to the Callie that I don't want her to back up is I'm going to rush towards her anytime she crosses the threshold. Now she just sat down, that's a good time to step backwards. Now when I step back, when dogs communicate with each other through movement, they usually put a pause in between each step, or especially when we communicate with them. So I paused, and I take another step backwards. Now, if I do this, then your dog is probably, the first time you take a step backwards, your dog is probably going to come back forward right away. Now, a couple of tips. Never move backwards if your dog is walking towards you or pacing around. Try to stand here and wait for them to be stationary. As soon as they're stationary or they sit, take one step backwards, one with each foot, and then pause. If your dog comes forward, rush forward and stop at the line. And at first, you're going to have to do it's going to feel like a waltz. You're going to be going back and forth. That's okay. And eventually you'll get to the point where you take a step back and your dog stays. Then you take another step back and stay. And you keep on repeating this process. Now you might get to a certain point where you get way back here and the dog starts coming in, rush towards them. But if I'm way back here and my dog crosses the line and I rush at the dog and I get this far and the dog's across the line, I stop at this point. I don't always have to go to the line. I only continue moving forward if the dog crosses the line. Now, Callie just laid down is really what the end result of what you're looking for. Callie already knows this command. We're using a larger dog because it was easier to film the shot. Now, once the dog is sitting or lying down, now you're ready for the next step, which is where we're going to grab a piece of bacon or roast beef or something like that, and you're going to put it in your microwave and microwave it for like a minute. Now, when you're microwaving it, it's going to start emitting smells, and that's going to be very attractive to your dog, and they're going to try to come in. If they do, you stop what you're doing, you rush towards them and stop enforcing at this point again. Now, you keep on doing this back and forth while it's cooking. Now, I have a really fast microwave. My bacon's already done. So I pull out my pretend bacon, and I put it here on the counter. That smell is probably going to attract your dog, so again, you'd rush towards them. Now, once you get them to sit or lie down with the bacon out and it's smelling and sizzling, and if you don't like bacon, use roast beef. Now I'm going to pretend that I'm cooking. I'm going to grab some stuff, I'm going to move some stuff around. I'm going to try to emulate the things that I do when I'm actually cooking. So you cook your stove burner on and all the rest of that fun stuff. And the whole time you're watching the dog out of your corner of your eye. As soon as it crosses the threshold, you rush towards it. And you saw how that made Callie move away. So you rush towards it and you keep on doing this back and forth while you go through the motions of what your dog perceives you doing as cooking. Because it smells like you're cooking, and it sure looks like you're cooking. And you're not distracted, because when we're actually cooking, we're thinking about the order of the ingredients and how long to cook something for and stirring it, and otherwise we're going to ruin our meal. So now when the dog crosses the threshold, we miss that 3-second window that we've talked about in other videos. So instead, you pretend, and the dog comes across, and you rush over. I make a hissing sound as well. And eventually you get to the point where when you come in the kitchen, the dog, if it comes in with you, you say out, the dog happily goes out and comes out here and sits, and then you go into in your actual cooking mode. Now you can do the same principle, same version of this when you're actually eating dinner or eating a snack. Microwave a piece of roast beef and sit down at the dinner table and enforce the boundary around your table. California, you did such a good job, girl. Sit. Now the rest of the time your puppy can come and go out of the kitchen because you're not preparing food. And it'll be a little bit off-putting, and if you watch video, I don't know how we edit this together, but if you saw it, Callie kind of had a slinky move to her, kind of like that. And when she does that, that's her way of saying, I'm not sure if what I'm doing is right or wrong, or I'm not wanted, or whatever it is. Don't worry about that. We don't want to hurt our dog or cause any discomfort, but we do want to let them know, hey, just because you want to come inside doesn't mean that you get to come inside. And remember, the more you respect or you enforce boundaries, the more the dog sees you acting like a leader. And that's going to make them more inclined to want to listen to you. And it also reduces a lot of pressure and stress off their shoulders because they don't feel like they're responsible for the world. California, sit. Well, this is Callie, and these are tips and tricks on how you can enforce an invisible boundary with your puppy.